You know that feeling. Things start to get better, you get a little ahead, maybe you saved a bit, maybe you paid something off. Maybe you just had a few good weeks where the money actually behaved, and you start to feel it. That specific, cautious optimism of someone who thinks, maybe this time is different. Maybe this time it is actually going to stick. And then something happens. It always does. And you are back at the beginning. Again. Not quite broke, not in crisis necessarily, just reset, starting over. The progress gone, the momentum lost, the savings depleted, or the debt rebuilt, or the budget blown, and you are standing at the beginning of the same road you have walked before, wondering what happened and why it keeps happening to you specifically. This video is about that cycle, not just what it is, but why it exists, why it is so hard to break, and what actually interrupts it. Because the broke cycle is not random bad luck. It is a pattern, and patterns have causes, and causes can be addressed. Let's get into it. First, what the broke cycle actually is. The broke cycle is not simply being broke. Plenty of people are broke at a specific moment in time and move past it cleanly. The broke cycle is the repeating pattern of getting ahead and losing ground, making progress and losing progress, over and over in a loop that feels like it has no exit. It looks like this. Financial pressure builds, something has to change, the person gets serious, cuts back, works more, makes sacrifices, starts to build a little, things improve, the pressure eases. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the urgency fades, the discipline relaxes, the old habits creep back, the old spending returns, and eventually, usually triggered by something, sometimes not, the ground that was gained is lost. The cycle resets, the pressure builds again. The cycle is not one thing going wrong. It's a pattern of how the financial situation responds to pressure and how it responds to relief, and understanding both responses is the key to breaking it. The broke cycle almost always begins with genuine financial pressure. Something has become unsustainable. The credit card balance, the empty savings account, the paycheck that does not stretch far enough, the debt that is mounting. Something is wrong enough that the person cannot ignore it anymore. And here's something important to understand about this phase stage. It works. It genuinely motivates change. People in genuine financial pressure make real sacrifices. They cut expenses they didn't think they could cut. They work extra hours they didn't think they had. They say no to things they used to say yes to without thinking. The pressure creates genuine behavioral change that produces real financial results. This is why the cycle feels so confusing from the inside, because it worked before. The person saved money in a pressure phase. They paid something off. They got ahead. The strategy, restrictions, sacrifice, discipline, genuinely produced results. The problem is not the strategy. The problem is what happens when it works. The most dangerous moment in the broke cycle is not the bottom, it's the middle. When things have improved, but the goal is not yet fully achieved. When the pressure has eased, but the work is not done. Because when the pressure eases, when the account balance improves, when the debt gets a little smaller, when the financial situation becomes less acute, the motivation that was produced by the pressure disappears. The urgency that drove the sacrifices fades. The discipline that felt necessary when things were bad starts to feel excessive now that things are better. And slowly, not all at once, not in one dramatic decision, the old patterns return. The dinner out becomes twice. The subscription canceled comes back as a different one. The morning coffee at home becomes a cafe stop a few days a week. Each individual drift is too small to feel significant. Together, they rebuild the exact spending pattern that created the original pressure. Lifestyle drift is the silent reset mechanism of the broke cycle. The specific reasons the cycle keeps repeating. Understanding that the cycle exists is not enough. To break it, you need to understand the specific mechanisms that keep it going. Because the broke cycle is not one problem, it's several interconnected problems that reinforce each other. The emergency fund gap. The most mechanical reason the cycle repeats is the absence of a financial buffer. Every time the cycle resets, it's usually triggered, or at least accelerated, by an unexpected expense. The car repair, the medical bill, the appliance that breaks, the job situation that changes. These events are not random, they are statistically certain. Life produces financial surprises with complete regularity. The person without an emergency fund absorbs these surprises directly into their financial progress, undoing weeks or months of work with a single event. The emergency fund is not a nice to have. It is the structural element that prevents external events from resetting the cycle. Without it, the cycle can always be reset by something outside your control. The lifestyle drift problem. When things improve financially, most people don't notice the spending creeping back up. It doesn't announce itself. There's no single moment of decision where a person says, "I'm going to undo my progress now." It happens gradually. The dinner out once becomes twice. The subscription canceled comes back as a different one. The morning coffee at home becomes a cafe stop a few days a week. Each individual drift is too small to feel significant. Together, they rebuilt the exact spending pattern that created the original pressure. Lifestyle drift is the silent reset mechanism of the broke cycle. The motivation structure problem. The broke cycle runs on crisis motivation, the kind that activates in response to genuine pressure and fades when the pressure eases. Crisis motivation is powerful, but it's not sustainable. It cannot be maintained indefinitely because it requires the presence of a crisis to function. The moment the crisis resolves, the motivation dissolves. Building financial health requires a completely different kind of motivation, one that is not dependent on things being bad, one that is connected to where you are going towards rather than how bad things currently are. Goal motivation rather than crisis motivation. The person who is motivated by a specific future they are building towards has a consistent motivational source. The person who is only motivated by how bad things currently are can only maintain momentum while things are bad. The identity gap. This is the deepest and least discussed reason the cycle continues. The broke cycle is not just a financial pattern, it is a self-concept pattern. Many people who cycle through broke unconsciously identify as someone who struggles financially, not as a permanent label they have chosen, but as a deep, unexamined belief about what is normal for them, what they deserve, what is realistic for their life. And that identity, when left unexamined, pulls behavior back toward what feels familiar. The financial progress starts to feel uncomfortable because it does not match the internal story, and the cycle resets. Not because of a specific financial event, but because the internal narrative needs the external reality to match it. What actually breaks the cycle? Breaking the broke cycle is not about trying harder. The people in the cycle are often trying extremely hard. It is about changing the specific structural elements that keep the cycle turning. Build the emergency fund first, before anything else. Not after the debt is paid, not after the savings goal is reached. First, even if it means the debt payoff takes longer, even if it means slower progress on other goals. The emergency fund is the only structural element that prevents external events from resetting your progress. Without it, you will always be vulnerable to being reset by something you did not choose and cannot control. Create systems, not just intentions. Intentions last as long as motivation. Systems last regardless of motivation. Automating your savings means the savings happen whether you feel motivated or not. Setting up a budget before the paycheck arrives means the money is allocated before the spending temptation exists. Building friction into impulsive purchases means the impulse has to work harder to become a transaction. Systems replace the need for constant willpower, and constant willpower is something no human being reliably has. Change the motivation source. Stop waiting for things to get bad enough to motivate change. Connect your financial behavior to a specific future you are building toward, not a crisis you are escaping. What does financial security actually look like for you? What does it feel like to have 3 months of expenses and savings? What does it mean to your life to be out of debt? What becomes possible when your money is working instead of just surviving? Build the future you are moving toward in as much concrete detail as possible, and let that future be what pulls you forward on the days when the crisis energy is gone. Address the identity piece. Start telling yourself a different story about what is normal for you financially, not as positive thinking, as deliberate identity work. The person who saves consistently is not someone else. It can be you. The person who breaks the cycle is not exceptional. They are someone who changed the story they told themselves about what was possible for them. You are not someone who always ends up at the beginning. You are someone who used to. The used to matters. Track obsessively during the middle phase. The most dangerous part of the cycle is when things are better but not finished. This is when the drift happens. This is when the motivation fades. Weekly tracking during this phase keeps the goal present and visible even when the pressure is gone. You cannot drift if you are looking at the numbers every week. The tracking replaces the pressure as the accountability mechanism. The honest truth about breaking the broke cycle. It is not one big decision. It is not one dramatic moment of change. It is a series of smaller decisions made consistently in the absence of pressure, when you could get away with not making them, that build a financial reality that is genuinely different from the one the cycle creates. The broke cycle breaks when you stop being motivated by how bad things are and start being motivated by how good things can be. When you stop managing emergencies and start building buffers. When you stop relying on willpower and start building systems. When you stop identifying as someone who always ends up back at the beginning and start acting like someone who is building something real. The cycle is not your destiny, it is a pattern, and you are not a pattern. You are a person with the ability to interrupt it. Start interrupting. I'm Zara, and we are just getting started.